Welcome. Greetings from Bajau, Indonesia. We're talking about the description of what is necessary in discernment. What is necessary? We talked about the first element, which is the most common sense element, is a member of the Roman Catholic Church, practicing member of the Roman Catholic Church. The second requirement, the second, you might say, principle or focus of discernment is under the protection of Our Lady of Mount Carmel. Protection of Our Lady of Mount Carmel means that she is the model for how we live as Catholics, how we relate to her Son, and how we communicate, especially to both to her Son and to the people of God. And is found in the gift of meditation, that Mary is the model for our prayer. We are Marian because we pray like Mary prayed. And then in the last video, I began the discussion of the third element, which will take some time to understand clearly. Under the influence of St. Teresa of Jesus and St. John of the Cross. In the last video, I mentioned also St. Teresa of the Child Jesus as a doctor of the church. So these three doctors of the church come from the Carmelite, Discalced Carmelite tradition of the spiritual life. As a matter of fact, St. Teresa of Jesus and St. John of the Cross are our spiritual, our holy parents. But it's especially the person of St. Teresa of Jesus. St. Teresa of Jesus is the one who received from God through the Holy Spirit the charism of the Discalced Carmelite lifestyle. We'll get more into the lifestyle when we talk about commitment to the order. But the principal formators of Discalced Carmelite life, the principal formators, are St. Teresa of Jesus and St. John of the Cross. The person who wants to apply has to have some capacity for studying. That doesn't mean they have to become philosophy courses or theology courses or that spirituality courses. We're not giving courses. Our formation is not just information. You can go to class and get information about St. Teresa of Jesus, get information about St. John of the Cross. But we're not looking just for information. We're looking for formation. We're looking to live in a certain way. And that certain way is really defined by St. Teresa and St. John of the Cross. So, an integral part of the formation that takes place in the postulancy of the secular order, in the novitiate of the secular order, in the years of temporary promises. There's the influence of the study of St. Teresa of Jesus takes place. St. John of the Cross also. Again, it's not a pursuit of an intellectual understanding. It's not that. It's how does St. Teresa help you understand your prayer life? How does St. Teresa help you to understand God's way of communicating? How does St. John of the Cross help you to understand what kind of discipline does the disciple need to have? These questions are these are the questions that are answered by St. Teresa of Jesus and St. John of the Cross. At least the foundation of the answer. Now, this interest in this ability to study St. Teresa of Jesus and St. John of the Cross is different in each level of the Carmelite, Discalced Carmelite order. Friars, nuns, without the obligation of family life, without the necessities of the vocation to matrimony, they have plenty of time on their hands to pursue over and over again St. Teresa of Jesus, St. John of the Cross. It's a sad thing for a Carmelite who doesn't know what St. Teresa teaches, doesn't know what St. John of the Cross teaches. And that, but we can add other Carmelite saints, other Carmelite authors. Saint Teresa of Jesus we've already mentioned. Saint Teresa Benedicta of the Cross, also sometimes known as Edith Stein. Saint Elizabeth of the Trinity. Saint Teresa of Jesus of the Andes. They write little things, but they share. Carmelites share their experience of God. That's what we teach. That's what these saints have in their writings. When you read a book, when you read Saint Teresa of Jesus, you are having a dialogue with Saint Teresa of Jesus. When you open the book, at least my experience is, I can read about Saint Francis of Assisi. Oh, he's very holy. Really very holy. I can read Saint Thomas Aquinas, who was perhaps the most famous Dominican. And yes, absolutely right. It's very good, very clear explanation. I can read Saint Francis of Assisi, Saint Francis de Sales. I can read the writings of other saints. They really are impressive. But my reading of Saint Teresa of Jesus and Saint John of the Cross is completely different. When I read Saint Teresa reads me. All of her writings, even in the interior castle, Las Moradas, even where she's talking about the highest points of the spiritual experience, she's dialoguing with us. We're having a dialogue with Saint Teresa about our life, about ourselves. We're having a dialogue. We try to understand what St. John of the Cross says, and we scratch our head, and then we realize he's trying to tell us what happens in our experience of God, in our experience of life. So these people, St. Teresa of Jesus, St. John of the Cross, are fundamental to, they're the foundation on which everything else can take place. If somebody comes to the secular order, great worker, a person who's sincerely interested in the life of prayer, and it's great devotion to Our Lady, especially the scapular, but has no interest in studying about St. John, what the teaching of St. Teresa is, or what the teaching of St. John of the Cross is, I don't see how that person has a vocation to be a member of the secular order. Again, confraternity of the scapular might be where that person belongs. But if they don't find St. Teresa of Jesus interesting, if they don't find St. John of the Cross interesting, why do they want to be Discalced Carmelites? That's true for friars, that's true for nuns, that's true for seculars. For example, well, suppose this person who comes to the secular order does not have the ability to read, or books are not available. I live in a country where people who speak Bahasa Indonesia have very little available to them in the way of reading. There's something that most of the writings of St. Teresa, the works of St. Teresa have been translated to Bahasa Indonesia. Some of the writings are available of St. John of the Cross, some of St. Teresa, but there's not a lot. And there are many people who have difficulty reading, especially older people. But they might not have difficulty understanding. It's the responsibility of the formators and of the spiritual assistant to make sure that they communicate what the teaching is. They might understand the teaching because of experience. They might understand because of what God is doing in their soul. And this explanation about what St. Teresa says, what St. John of the Cross says, what St. Teresa says about conversion, what St. John of the Cross says about dark night. These things might make sense, might help them, might be helpful to them. So we're looking and saying, Okay, this person wants to be OCDS. Can they understand? If you're living in a country where there's the availability of books and the possibility of reading, fine, that's excellent. Read. But even in places where there's not the availability of books, or there's not the possibility of reading, there's still the possibility of understanding. We still have to form people in the spirituality that is distinctively Discalced Carmelite. This academic foundation, this study of what the saints have to say, the study of their lives, the study of their teaching, helping people to apply their teaching to their own spiritual life by good explanation. This is not an intellectual academic pursuit. This is a pursuit that is vital to the spiritual life. Under the influence of St. Teresa of Jesus and St. John of the Cross. Thank you.